I think, workflow-wise, when you subtract yourself from the computer, you're going to create differently. I find that you're listening a lot more to what you're creating, and it can tend to be a little more fluid, right? But sometimes you just need to go back and do something. Cool, so let's add in some hi-hats. We're going to just add these on the off beats between the kicks and the snares. So to do that, it's going to land right here and right here. Right, we're done. We just made a tech house track, and we'll put it up on Beatport. So what can we do with these hi-hats? We can change the velocity, which is going to adjust how hard or how fast that note is struck. So it's going to have a direct correlation to volume, right? So when you press and hold on a notepad, we get these note settings up here on the top right of the push. So we get nudge, which is going to allow us to move notes either a little bit forward or back. We have the step length, right, which is going to allow us to increase the length of that note. With drum sounds, it's not really going to have that big of an effect. With instruments, it will. We have then the fine tuning, which just fine tunes the length of the note. And then we have the velocity, which lowers or raises. We can see down in the bottom, we have our velocity menu there. So we want to add some velocity changes so we can get our hi-hat pattern to sound a little more lifelike, right? Like no drummer is ever going to hit the same cymbal at the exact same timing and at the exact same intensity every time. If they do, they're a robot, right? So this is something I always tell to my students is we're making electronic music. We have to kind of inject human error into our productions, right? And we have to do this in small spots all over the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my 4 fingers here, and I'm going to press and hold all of the pads so I can adjust the volumes of every other hi-hat together. Magic, right? So I'm just going to lower it just a little bit, not a lot, because if it's too much, let's see. Right, that's a little bit too much. Right, pretty nice. So let's take it a step further. I selected those 4, I made those different. Let's keep making variations. I'm going to hold the 2 now and lower the velocities on those a little bit. So we're creating now a difference between, we have a strong velocity, a sort of weak velocity, medium velocity, or I guess that would be strong again, and then a weaker velocity. So we're creating a little bit of variation in that pattern. Right? Very subtle, but these things add up over time. So the next thing that I want to show you that you can access in this same note settings menu is the nudge, the ability to nudge it, right? So nudging is taking our notes off of this super defined grid, right? So it's de-roboticizing it, right? So we can move these notes a little bit off the grid. So let's do it really extreme and see what this sounds like. Right? Really too much. But even just about 8 or 9% there, and if we really zoom in, we're like, yeah, there's the note, there's that. I swear this stuff adds up. You might think I'm crazy, but it does. So let's do the same thing. Let's say maybe just create some randomization in these. So I'm going to hold this second pad and maybe nudge that one a little bit further and take this last one and nudge it yet even further and might do a tiny velocity change. So we're just trying to introduce micro differences. right? And even this second one now feels a little bit too swung. Let's just check these, or is that one? Right? How many of you guys are super music producer nerds? Yeah? The answer should be everyone, right? If you talk about micro timings and you're like, yeah, this is cool. It is cool. You might be a nerd. So we have our pattern there. We've learned a couple things about creating some variation, creating some difference there. Let's add in a couple extra snare drums to kind of make our groove a little bit better. So this is something I like to do a lot. I tend to have the main snare and my kind of layered claps there, the one we added an effect to. And I like to have a couple different snares that aren't the main snare that can emphasize different notes. Essentially, they're kind of playing what would be referred to as a ghost note if you're a drummer. So I like to place these notes in areas in our clip or in our pattern where it's going to be either right before one of those main hi-hats or at the end of the phrase. So usually on the second 16th note or the last 16th note here. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's start with this guy and put this on the grid there. And again, I'm going to nudge this and crank the velocity down because I don't want this snare to dominate too much. I just want it to add to the groove. Right, maybe even less velocity. And with me, rather than using that same snare over and over again, I like to kind of chop back and forth between these three, right? So maybe I have this one on that same position on the next bar, or not the same position, but on this last 16th note here, crank the velocity down, nudge it over, and now let's take this guy and add it right there. Same thing, nudge, back in time, turn down the velocity. Let's see what we got. Right? And it's cool to me because now this pattern here kind of emphasizes even more that clap with the reverb on it. And we have a little bit different of a pattern here. I might take a crash to emphasize the very first downbeat and just place that on the one. And we have a very basic house beat. Yeah, cool. So just to review there, we talked about using the step sequencer. So the step sequencer being this top pattern here. So that process again is just simply selecting a note, punching it into the grid wherever you like. We remember over on the side here, this pad strip allows us to change the value of each pad. So currently it's set to 16th notes. I showed you guys how to add an effect to an individual pad. Again, it's just selecting that pad. We want to, we would need to be in the device mode. We need to select the pad icon, which is a square, and then we hit what button? Add device, right? So we hit add device, we choose our effect through the browser, and that's applied there. Then I showed you guys how to adjust note timings and velocities. So what was the process? How do I change a note velocity? Hold the pad down that I want to change. We see note settings. We now see velocity, fine, length, and nudge. So nudge, we remember again, allows us to offset our samples, and velocity allows us to change the velocity of that. If you want to do any of this stuff in Ableton, if you don't have a push, good quick key on the Mac is to hover above a note and hold Command. That will give you this symbol, and you can click and drag up and down to do that. If you click and hold, You can basically free it from the grid momentarily to do that. Cool.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.